Welcome to this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Elie Feder. He is a Rabbi and a maths professor, and he hosts the Physics to God podcast with his co-host. Welcome to the show, Elie.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here, Ajay.
You're welcome to the show, Elie. You are welcome to India in this online form. And I'm very happy to share today we are celebrating our 75th Republic Day. So this is a very special day that's why you see the Indian flag in the background.
Great.
It is such a proud moment for us to be, cherishing, to be able to think the way we want to. And that is what freedom is all about. Freedom of speech and expression, freedom of religion. These are wonderful topics, and this is where we'll be talking about, God and science, and that is where, freedom of thought will take us to better understanding of all this discussion at the moment. So welcome to the show once again, and a lot of people will be able to benefit from this discussion, God and science. So my first question to you, Elie, is to understand, they say that almost every religion, if you see, talks about, God having created us in his own image.
Right.
And a lot of people understand this, but growing up, then their reasoning comes up in a different way. Several people do not want to see God in the way others see it. So I want to understand your understanding of God from your point of view, and then we'll move forward.
Okay, I guess that's a great question. So I guess the primary way we like to think of God is as the creator, the source of everything which we see. That's the main idea, is that in Torah, in Judaism, the main idea is God is, first of all, he is the creator of the whole universe. The fact that God is there for us and he relates to us is true, but the primary, if you think about God, God is the source of everything which exists.
Yeah. Elie, I see there is an audio problem a bit. Maybe is there there's a freeze sort of a thing. So I'm wondering where this freeze is. On this side, the connection is showing okay, but I just want to understand from your point of view.
I don't know. It should be okay with me also.
Okay.
You don't hear me? You hear me okay or no?
No, not fully.
Not fully?
The voice is a bit jump. It was fine when we started.
It was, right? I could try to change.
Now it is good. Very good. Yes, Elie. It was good at the end.
Hold on. I'm just changing to a different network. Maybe that will be better.
Yeah, this is good. This is good.
Good? Okay, good.
Yes. Yeah, carry on. So what is your understanding of God as a maths professor and also as a Rabbi?
Yeah, so my understanding of God is primarily he's the source of everything which exists. When we look around at our universe, we see all types of beauty and structure and amazing, from the stars, the heavens, to people, to life, to everything on earth and everything beyond. And the source of everything is God. That's the way we think of as God.
Right. The source of everything is God. Now, why then, a lot of people believe, several people do not believe. Is it that they are waiting for much more concrete evidence? Or is it that a lot of people, including those who believe in God, are looking for the, existence of God or the presence of God in a different form? I want to understand your perspective on this, Elie.
Right. That's a great question. Yeah. So I think it's a good point, is that people, for centuries or millennia, people have believed in God. And with the advent of science, as science develops, I think people get this impression that science has somehow made God outdated. And I think there are a lot of atheistic scientists and philosophers who say, oh, God is some old, outdated idea, and we don't need him anymore because science has discovered all this wisdom in our universe, and he made God, antiquated and old. And I think that's really a mistake. I think that in truth, and this is what our podcast is about, Physics to God, is that studying science, a good analysis of physics, of science, leads directly towards the knowledge, towards the understanding of God. And I think, but there has to be some subtleties involved. I think people usually think about God in the way they learned about God when they were 5 years old, and it's an immature type of a view of God who's just there doing everything for you, as if it's all about you and your desires and your wants. And I think a person has to take a more mature view of God. And I think people don't realize that there is a way to relate to God in a more intelligent, mature way, and that science actually leads, the new discoveries in physics actually lead to the existence of God. And yeah.
Right, Elie. Now let's look at that. People who are more tilted towards science, who understand things in a much more different manner, not beyond the spiritual level, they have many questions about God. Good
Right.
enough.
Right.
Is it so? My question is to understand from you, Elie, that is it about the limitation of science to understand God? Why I ask this is earlier on, people can expect, are very convinced that presence of air. And they earlier on also people, when they had no equipment to measure or see air or understand it, they knew that there is air.
Right.
There was always the existence of so many technologies. Then we created those equipments like mobile phone today.
Right.
In terms of science, when we have those questions about God, but science, the present day science has not been able to create the right equipment, the right thing, or the right way to look God. So we are challenging the existence of God in the way it is. How do you look at that? People from science questioning God, should they be looking at the limitation of science or the limitation of God? I want to understand from you.
Good question. So I think it's that people don't, and this is what, again, people don't realize that there's the argument, again, the argument in our podcast we present is from something called fine tuning. I think when people study the universe, they think that science explains everything. But when we study the laws of physics, it turns out that the laws of physics themselves have what are known as like the qualitative components. The laws of physics are something like quantum mechanics and general relativity. But those laws themselves, as beautiful as those laws are, the laws have these numbers. They're called constants of nature. And these constants of nature, for example, is like the mass of an electron, or something called the fine structure constant, which is a number which determines how strong the electromagnetic force is, how strong two electrons will repel. And this number is something like 137.13579, something crazy like that. And these are numbers which are built into the fabric of our universe. And scientists for years, since Richard Feynman called explaining these numbers one of the biggest mysteries of physics. And for years, scientists had no knowledge. How do you explain a number? I understand the laws are these great laws, but physics itself had these numbers. And the only way we know these numbers, and there are a lot of them, like 25 numbers like that. The only way we know these numbers is by measuring them. And it turns out they're always exactly the same. That's why they're called constants. And there was a discovery starting in the 1980s, the biggest in like 1998, I think it was, with this discovery of something called the cosmological constant. Science has discovered that if these numbers, these constants, were a little bit different, then there would be no order, no structure, no complexity, no stars, no planets, no life, and no chemistry. All the sciences are totally dependent upon these numbers being what they call fine-tuned, being set to just the right value. And if they're off by a small percentage, a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller, our universe would not be able to unfold to result in all the structures which we have. And I think that's what a discovery of modern science is realizing, that baked into the very fabric of the laws of nature is indications of the fact that these numbers have to be precisely tuned to just what's necessary to bring about our beautiful, structured, complex, ordered universe. And in our podcast, we argue how that points directly to intelligence. Intelligence is a person, when a person makes an intelligent decision, they're able to select the precise plan which will bring about some objective, some purpose. And when we see the values of the constants, which are attuned to the numbers which are necessary to bring about our amazing complex universe, we argue that leads directly towards the evidence of an intelligent cause. And that's what we mean by God. And therefore, science, we think you could say it's invisible. That might be true. But for instance, one could see a kingdom, and even if you don't see the king, if you see order in the kingdom and people aren't killing each other, you say there's a king, there's a government. So you might not see the king, but you could see the evidence of a king from the fact that there's order on the streets. Similarly, we don't see God, and we have to relate to God in a more abstract type of a way. At the same time, we could see the evidence of the intelligence of God through the creation. And I think that's what we're trying to show without getting into particular religions. Every religion has different ideas, and the foundation of any religion is the idea of a God, of a creator. And we're showing is that modern discoveries in physics lead towards the existence of a God who created the universe.
Right, right. So should we look at God from a different angle? A lot of people from biology, they look at it differently. From physics, you have given example. So what is the right way to look God? Because science is science. There are different areas of science. My understanding is that even a lot of doctors who are understanding biology much more better than perhaps people who are studying physics, they understand God in their own manner. And many a times it is that at the end of the day, after doing all the best efforts, they talk about now it's up to God.
Right.
Finally we rest. So is it that, a lot of people look at the term God whenever it is convenient, and whenever it is not? For example, even in insurance industry, they use this word called act of God. When you have to lay the blame on someone else, then or not give insurance, then you have got earthquakes, every other thing, and you will put it as act of God.
Right.
In some way, so maybe something good happens, you put your intelligence at front. It is because of my intelligence, not knowing that your intelligence is again the creation of someone else. But then if something goes wrong, we put it, okay, it is all because of God. I want you to help us understand this part both from a spiritual perspective. You interpret the letters of God, the law, the religion, that help us understand about from your Bible, from Talmud, and then also from the other perspective as a mathematics professor, also the understanding of physics.
Right. Okay, that's a great question. Yeah, so I mean, I think it's definitely true that sometimes people relate to God as almost like because they want, like when people are children, their parents take care of them, and everything is there for them. And then when people grow up, they feel at a loss. They feel like now the world is a very scary place. I don't have my parents taking care of me. And people invent gods to be able to take care of their every need. And I think that is, in a certain sense, a more like a primitive, immature type of a way to think about God. In the Torah, the idea in Judaism, the idea of God is we don't just invent a God because we wish for there to be a God, but we realize God as the evidence points to God. And our primary focus is relating to God with our minds based upon our knowledge, not just because, as you said, when you are in fear, like they say, there's no atheist in the foxhole. All of a sudden we're afraid, and now we turn to God. But then when we're successful, people say, oh, I don't need God anymore. I think that's a mistaken way to relate to God. A person should embrace God based upon their mind, based upon where their knowledge leads them. And I think that's a big service we're trying to do in this podcast, is to show we don't have to have this dichotomy, if you will, a disconnect where with our minds, in our minds, we embrace science and business and all the different tools of the modern world. And then we think of God as this kind of make-believe thing, which we just kind of bring out when we feel like it. But we kind of try to show that God is really grounded. The same tools which we use to analyze the world in the modern day leads us to being able to think about God, leads towards God. And in fact, in further seasons of our podcast, we're gonna show, we can develop more. We haven't done this yet, but people have a lot of questions about God, and they have all different types of questions. Who created God? Who designed God? What does God even mean? And we're going to take this up in our third season of our podcast. We're going to show how the same types of tools that scientists use to analyze fundamentals of our universe, let's say like electrons, those same tools, categories are appropriate to use when thinking about God. And that's part of the point of our podcast, to show that in modern times, it's still reasonable to talk about God, to think about God, but we can't just treat God as just this fairy tale. If we think about it as a fairy tale, then it kind of serves us when we want it, and then when we don't, it's kind of, we're just in this make-believe world. And that's the idea. I think that's a mistaken way to relate to God. The way to relate to God is based upon truth, based upon knowledge, based on understanding, and not necessarily, and sometimes God is threatening to our needs and to our wishes and our desires, and that's all part of the picture. That's part we have to submit to, where the knowledge that there is a greater force beyond ourselves, which sometimes is helpful, sometimes it makes us happy, sometimes it makes us sad, but that's wherever the evidence leads.
Right, right, Elie. Let's understand it from your podcast, Physics to God.
Yes.
You have many guests. Do you also get guests from, other religions? What is their understanding of this concept of God, looking at it from different ways? Do they have the same ways of looking at this whole concept of God or the existence of God, or they tend to look at it also from the science angle?
Right.
People who are, religious, so they look
Right.
at religion, God from a different angle
Right.
when they are doing their work as a doctor, as a physicist or something.
Right.
But when they come home, they become, a person of God. I want to understand what your guests, your, ideas are generally, what you understand from them, any challenges that they have put forward in, accepting God the way they want to see God or accept God.
Right. Okay. It's a good question. So our podcast, we have one season of our podcast. We have 10 episodes, and we don't have any guests yet. We're actually developing an argument, which in pieces. So it's I and my co-host, Rabbi Aaron Zimmer. So we work together.
Right.
We've been studying this argument for many, many years, let's say 10 years or so. We've been writing a book, and now we're trying to put the argument into a podcast form. So we don't really have any guests on our podcast. But I do think I can answer your question anyways, but it's
Right,
not
right.
from my guests on our podcast. But again, I do think that there are different ways that people think about God, and there's different religions. And in a certain sense, our podcast is more about God or theology, if you will, not about religion. We think the foundation of every religion is the idea of God, the creator of the universe. And in that sense, we think different people, different religions might have arguments or disagreements about other things, but I think what the evidence, at least at this point, is pointing to is the fact that there is an intelligent cause of our universe. And we're going to talk about later about what we can and cannot know about this intelligent cause. But in the podcast, we're trying to keep it without getting down into the details of any religion. We're just trying to discover the idea of God in a more, based upon the modern day evidence. Now, again, I do think there are a lot of people who don't like this. There are a lot of people who say, listen, I just want to have faith in God. I don't want to have to think. I just believe whatever I believe, and that's working for me. And, for some people that does work. I think oftentimes that's could lead people down bad paths. As we know, you could have all different types of just blind belief without any evidence could lead down to dangerous types of fundamentalism. And I think it's important for us to be able to think about God based upon our minds, not just based upon what we wish. But again, some people I think would be unhappy with this type of approach. They'll say, oh, why do we need to think about God? Why do we need to look about science? Who really cares? I just believe what I believe, and then so be it. But again, there's terrible, destructive, terrorism in the name of God, and all different types of, once a person is allowed, enables themselves to just go free reign with whatever they wish and whatever they want, I think it lends itself down to dangerous types of paths. So the idea of keeping one's relationship to God grounded in an analysis in science and where the evidence leads, I think is important for people to do.
Right, right. And in terms of, so if we have to find God, where do we find God? Should we look at our Earth, Mars, any other solar system,
Right.
universe, another universe?
Right.
Where do you think we should be looking at God? Many a times we come to know, we feel that it's inside us. Many a times if you look, you will find God there. I want to understand from you, as a Rabbi, what do you tell people, where
Good
they should
question.
look God? When
Good
you
question.
talk to your co-host, he has a physics degree, if I understand. So
Yes.
what does he say? How should we look at? You
Yes.
talk about that recent discoveries of modern physics strongly indicate that the existence of God. So do you also feel that all these advancements will lead us to God in some form for us to accept it? What
Yeah.
is your take on this?
Good question. Good question. So it's actually interesting because people, as you mentioned to me earlier, maybe it was before we got online, is the idea is that people often see God from biology. That's a more common approach towards God, is to study life, the complexities of life, and to see God from biology. And there are many books which are written about that. And while we think that's decent, that's a good idea, but we think if you like the argument from biology, then you love the argument from physics, because physics is much better in a few regards. First of all, physics is the foundations of our universe. It's the fundamental. Biology is rooted in chemistry, and chemistry is rooted in physics. And in a certain sense, the underlying reality of our universe that makes everything tick are the laws of physics. So if a person might say, look at life, and how did life emerge? And there must be, that points to God. Well, life is an emergent phenomenon. It arises from the development of the chemicals and of the underlying physical fundamental particles, and ultimately biology is explainable based on physics. So when you deal with life, you say, well, where did it come from? Well, maybe it came from their theories. The theory of evolution says that life has evolved over billions and millions over millions of years. But the laws of physics, as far as we know, they don't evolve. They're fixed. They're built into the very fabric of our universe. From the Big Bang, everything we see, the number 137.135999937, it's called the fine structure constant, is a fixed number that's built into the very fabric of our universe from the beginning. There's no change in that. The cosmological constant is 0.000000, 120 zeros and a 3. This is a number that's built into the very fabric of our universe. And these numbers are what point to God. So it's like you see the intelligence. There's no room to explain these away by some process of evolution over millions and millions of years. These numbers are fixed into the universe. So whereas in biology, there's a theory of evolution, which has, maybe one could argue for or against, but it's a real scientific theory, which is counter to the idea of seeing God from biology. On the other hand, when physics, the only other explanation that's available for scientists to explain these numbers is something called the multiverse. And multiverses, they posit something which might sound like science fiction, but nowadays it's becoming, more popular among scientists, is that there's infinitely many universes out there. And our universe happens to, and they all have different numbers. So this number in our universe, 137.135, another universe might be 2 or 53 or whatever. And these numbers vary through all these different universes in a universe. And we happen to be in the one lucky universe that happens to have the constants just right. And that's a theory, just positing infinitely many parallel universes seems like science fiction. It seems like a much bigger reach than to posit one God who created our universe. And in a certain sense, this theory, which is not very scientific, it's more like philosophy, if you will, or seems somewhat far-fetched, make-believe, that's the other alternative to seeing God from physics. So that's why we think there is room to see God from biology. From looking anywhere in the universe, we could see the wisdom of God. We could see the great creations in life, in the person, in chemistry and astronomy. But we think that in physics, which is the most fundamental of all sciences, is really lends itself to a much stronger argument. There's no really great alternative other than multiverse. And we're going to take up in our next series all about multiverse and the weaknesses of multiverse. But we think because of its fundamental nature and because there's no real scientific alternative, the place to see God is really in physics itself.
Absolutely, absolutely. And talking of multiverse, it would be good mention, even in Lord Krishna's life, he has mentioned about the multiverse, and that is what we know. The first reference that I understood, or several other Indians would be able to relate, is 5,000 years back in Lord Krishna's life. If ever you come to search it on Google, that was the first time he mentions about the multiverse, where he wants to tell Lord Brahma, because he was a bit more, you can say a bit of a ego came into him and he thought that he is the only one. And then there were thousands of Brahmas there. We showed that, who had come from different universes. And then he showed that was the thing, that he could know that he is only one, not one of the thousands. And that is where there is this mention of the multiverse. There are several places everywhere, people have mentioned things, good things about existence of God. Even in physics, I want to understand from you, Ellie, is that you see, people may have their own understanding of things, but every time we come to God and talk about even the grand fabric of the universe, it talks about, in a way, or even God's particle. Everywhere we are running towards God to be able to explain the grandness or the vastness of everything. Our words fail, and every time we seek shelter, that hope and happiness in the name of God itself. That I find is a bit more, a bit, not ironical, but I don't know. I don't get the right words to explain how exactly to explain that. How do you see this?
Right. Well, I think it's interesting is that the universe, everything about our universe is amazing, and you could see the beauty, the wisdom that's built into every facet. Whether you look at life, at biology, whether from the smallest, the teeniest, down to cells, down to molecules, down to fundamental particles, or to the vastness, to look at the galaxies and the stars and the planets. And in any part of our lives, there's so much wisdom built into our universe. And therefore, I think God does come up in many places. The wisdom of God is manifest in a lot of places. Wherever we happen to turn, a person who is so attuned could find and could think about God and could see the wisdom of God. At the same time, sometimes that's based upon our, we might wish to find God, and we might suggest God is here, God is there, God is there. That's why we think it's important to have an argument in physics to God. We try to be rigorous and to show that all those other times when we see God, it's important to have this idea of God grounded. And we think this argument from physics really provides a solid, step-by-step, convincing argument. And not only the convincing, it's very accessible. I know that maybe some of your listeners I'm a math professor, and I teach math to students who, a lot of students are very afraid of math. They have what we call math phobia.
Including me.
Yeah. So math and physics also. Physics is scary. And it's a type of topic you say, oh, there's no way I can understand that. So my job is to take students, probably people like you or people who are afraid of math, and to explain it to them in clear, simple, plain terms. So my co-host Aaron, he's more of a higher level thinker, and he's involved in the physics, and he presents the arguments in a solid, rigorous way. And then my job is to make analogies, to find common language, to be able to help everybody understand it. And the goal is to be able to take these ideas and be convincing, and at the same time to be accessible to everybody, to be accessible to people who know math, who know physics, who don't know physics, and to explain it in clear, plain terms. And I think that's the value of this argument. We're trying to allow us not just to have God, this word that people throw around when we feel like it, but to have it rooted in a solid, convincing, compelling argument. And that's really what we're trying to do.
Absolutely. There is much to understand about these things, so much to understand about God from every aspect, from a lot of different angles. Be that as it may, it is nice to talk about these things, and this is just one episode for people to understand. You have got many episodes that people can learn and understand about such an interesting topic like this. So what is the best way for people to get to listen to your podcast, and also if they want to connect with you?
Okay, great. So we have a website, physicstogod.com. You can find it there, or you can just search on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcast. If you search Physics to God, you'll find it there. We have on our website, there's contact information. You could comment on different podcasts. We have the transcripts up there. So I say basically search Physics to God either on any podcast place or on our website, physicstogod.com.
Absolutely. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Sure. Pleasure to meet you, Ajay. Take care.
You too.